Welcome to another deep dive into the hidden corners of Fallout lore. Today, we're venturing into the frozen wasteland of what used to be Canada to uncover a story that challenges everything you thought you knew about survival after the Great War. We're exploring the resistance bunkers built by Canadian fighters who refused to accept American annexation, the underground cities they carved from permafrost and rock, and the impossible choice they faced when their greatest enemy became their only hope for the future. Let's descend into the darkness and discover what really happened in Canada's Refuge 7. I died in the winter of 2074. At least that's what the official American records say. Corporal Marcus Tremblay, age 28, Canadian Armed Forces, killed in action during a skirmish near Whitehorse. They even sent my mother a letter. My father burned it without reading past the first line. But I'm not dead. I'm speaking to you from 300 feet below what used to be the permafrost of the Northwest Territories. And if you're hearing this, it means someone finally found one of our beacon transmitters. It means our message made it out. It means you need to know what really happened up here in the north, what we built, and why we can never ever let them find us. They call it the annexation. What a sterile word for what they did to us. Like they just filed some paperwork and we became the 51st through 55th states. Nobody talks about the timber towns they burned. Nobody mentions the families executed for hiding food from American supply convoys. And nobody, absolutely nobody, talks about what we did in response. My war started the same way it did for thousands of other Canadians, watching American soldiers march through my hometown of Edmonton in 2067. They said they were just passing through to Alaska, protecting the oil pipeline from Chinese saboteurs, keeping North America safe. My father, a veteran himself, told me to keep my head down, said wars come and go, but family survives. I listened to him for exactly 3 months. That's how long it took for the Americans to decide that passing through meant setting up permanent checkpoints, rationing our own timber, and beating a shopkeeper half to death because he wouldn't sell them his entire stock of canned food at gunpoint. I was there. I watched it happen. And when I tried to help the old man, a soldier in power armor that made him look like some kind of metal giant pushed me into the mud with one hand and told me to be grateful. They were protecting us from the Reds. I joined the resistance that night, found them through a friend of a friend, met in a basement that smelled like sawdust and gun oil. There were 12 of us at that first meeting, former soldiers, loggers, teachers, even a nurse. We didn't have a name yet. Didn't have much of anything except anger and the knowledge that this wouldn't end with asking politely. The leader was a woman named Catherine Rousseau, a major in the Canadian Army before she'd gone underground. She had maps spread across a workbench marked with red circles and handwritten notes, pipeline routes, supply depots, patrol schedules. She looked at each of us and asked one question: "How far are you willing to go?" I said I'd go as far as needed. I meant it, we all did. Those early days were almost amateur hour compared to what came later. Small sabotage, cut fuel lines on transport trucks, misplaced supply shipments. Nothing that would get us killed, Catherine said, but everything that would slow them down, make them spend resources, make them understand that little America wasn't going to roll over. But then came 2072. That's when everything changed. That's when the Americans stopped pretending this was temporary, and General Buzz Babcock went on every radio station from Vancouver to Halifax to announce that Canada no longer existed. We were American territories now. Our resources were their resources. Our land was their land, and anyone who disagreed would be shot on sight. They weren't exaggerating. 3 days after Babcock's announcement, they executed 17 protesters in the streets of Toronto, lined them up against a wall, and had soldiers in those new titanium suits, the T-51B models fresh from the Anchorage front, gunned them down while cameras rolled. They wanted everyone to see, wanted us to be afraid. It had the opposite effect. Protests exploded into riots. Riots became firefights, and firefights became what the Americans would later call the Yukon Uprising, though it was so much more than just the Yukon. Every province, every territory, every town that still remembered it was Canadian first rose up. We attacked convoys, destroyed bridges, hit supply depots so hard the Americans had to pull troops from the Chinese front just to keep control. Catherine pulled our cell together the night after the Toronto massacre. Her face was harder than I'd ever seen it. She spread new maps on the table, but these weren't plans for sabotage. These were schematics, underground construction blueprints, geological surveys of the Canadian Shield. "We're not going to win this war," she said. "The Americans have power armor. They have air superiority. They have more soldiers than we have bullets. But we're going to survive it. And when this is over, when the bombs finally drop, because they will drop, we're going to be the ones who remember what Canada was." She told us about a network, hidden construction projects that had been in the works since 2069, right after the Americans started stripping our forest and polluting our rivers. Deep underground facilities built in secret by Canadian military engineers, funded by people who knew this was coming and refused to let our entire nation disappear without a trace. They weren't like the Vault-Tec installations the Americans were building. Those were experiments. We'd later learn prisons disguised as shelters. Ours were different. Ours were built to keep people alive and sane, to preserve not just bodies but culture, history, identity. The primary hub was designated Refuge 7, 300 feet below the permafrost, accessible only through concealed entrances in abandoned mine shafts and old pipeline service stations. The construction had been disguised as mineral surveys and geological research. American patrols had walked right over the access points dozens of times and never suspected a thing. Catherine said I was going north, said my engineering background from university made me valuable for the final construction phase, said I needed to disappear from American records before they connected me to our cell's activities, said if I stayed in Edmonton, I'd be dead within a month. She was right. 2 weeks after I left, the Americans raided every safe house we'd used. Everyone who stayed behind was either killed or sent to work camps near the pipeline. Catherine got away, but only barely. Last I heard of her, she was leading guerrilla actions in British Columbia, hitting American supply lines so hard they had to deploy the same power armor units they'd used to push the Chinese out of Anchorage. The Yukon was different from anything I'd experienced. Colder, harsher, and crawling with American military. They'd fortified every settlement, every crossroads, every place that could support human life, but they couldn't fortify the wilderness, couldn't patrol every frozen valley and ice-locked canyon. That's where we lived. Getting to Refuge 7 took 3 weeks of hiking through terrain that would kill you if you made one wrong step. I traveled with 2 other recruits, both former Canadian military. We moved at night when possible, hid during the day, and survived on whatever we could hunt or steal. American patrols passed within 50 meters of us twice. We held our breath in snowbanks and prayed they wouldn't see the tracks we'd tried to cover. When we finally reached the entrance, hidden behind a rockfall in an abandoned copper mine, I understood why Catherine had been so certain this would work. The Americans could never find this. Even if they suspected something was down here, the network of old mining tunnels created a maze that would take months to search. And we'd set up false trails, dead ends, even a few nasty surprises for anyone who came looking. The access shaft descended 320 feet, hand over hand down cable and metal rungs, the temperature dropping with every meter. My breath turned to fog, then to ice crystals that stuck to my eyebrows and beard. At the bottom, a pressure door, real military-grade stuff, not the cheap commercial locks the Americans were putting on their supply depots. I knocked the pattern Catherine had taught me. 3 slow, 2 fast, 1 slow. The door cracked open and light spilled out, warm and golden, and completely unexpected this deep, underground. A man in a Canadian Forces uniform, sergeant's stripes still visible despite the wear, looked me over, checked the identification papers we'd forged, asked me questions only someone from Edmonton would know. Satisfied, he let me through. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about our chances. Refuge 7 wasn't a bunker, it was a city. corridors carved from solid rock, reinforced with stolen American construction materials. Living quarters for 500 people, though only 200 were there when I arrived. A hydroponics facility growing actual vegetables under ultraviolet lamps. A machine shop capable of repairing anything from radios to rifles. A medical bay with equipment that put some hospitals to shame. And at the center of it all, a command center that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Banks of monitors showing footage from hidden cameras scattered across the Yukon. Radio equipment pulling in signals from similar installations we'd built across what used to be Canada. Maps covering entire walls marked with American positions, resource caches, and escape routes. The commander of Refuge 7 was Colonel James MacDonald, a career military man who'd been part of the planning since 2069. He walked me through the facility, explaining how every system had redundancies and backups, how the geothermal taps provided power and heat, how the water filtration pulled from underground aquifers the Americans didn't even know existed. This isn't about fighting anymore, he told me. We lost that war the moment Babcock made his announcement. This is about survival, about making sure that when the world burns, and it will burn, there are still Canadians left who remember what we fought for. I asked him how he could be so certain the bombs would fall. He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. The Americans and Chinese have been building toward this for years, he said. The only question is when, not if. And when it happens, Vault-Tec's experiments won't save anyone. But we might. He assigned me to the engineering section. My job was to help expand the living quarters and reinforce the structural supports. We worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The 7th day was for training, weapons maintenance, first aid, radiation protocols, everything we'd need if the unthinkable happened. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. But here's the thing, nobody told me when I arrived. The thing I only learned after 3 months of living and working in Refuge 7. We weren't the only installation. We weren't even close. There were 13 primary sites scattered across the Canadian wilderness. Refuge 7 in the Yukon. Refuge 3 in the Manitoba Shield. Refuge 11 in Newfoundland. Each one designed to hold between 300 and 800 people. Each one connected by encrypted radio and, in some cases, by tunnels that stretched for kilometers underground through old mining networks and natural cave systems. The full network, if it all worked as planned, could preserve nearly 8,000 Canadians. Not a nation, Colonel MacDonald admitted, but a seed, something that could grow back when the radiation settled and the world stopped screaming. We had historians documenting everything they could about Canadian culture, writers recording oral histories from the people who'd survived the early years of American occupation, teachers preparing lessons for children who hadn't been born yet, children who would only know Canada through stories and memories. And we had fighters. People like me who understood that keeping this secret meant fighting a different kind of war. Not the open battles that had marked the Yukon uprising, but something quieter and more dangerous. The Americans knew resistance fighters had vanished into the wilderness. They knew someone was still hitting their supply lines and sabotaging their equipment. What they didn't know was where we were coming from. And we worked very, very hard to keep it that way. I participated in 7 raids during my time at Refuge 7. Quick strikes against isolated outposts, theft of food, medicine, equipment. We'd hit fast, take what we needed, and disappear back into the wilderness before reinforcements could arrive. The Americans would search for days and find nothing but empty tundra and frozen valleys. Twice they got close. Twice they followed our trail to within a kilometer of one of the concealed entrances. Both times we had to trigger avalanches and cave-ins to bury the access points and redirect them. We lost one entire entrance that way, sealing it permanently rather than risk exposure. The worst moment came in January of 2076. American forces deployed a new type of surveillance drone over the Yukon, something with thermal imaging that could see through snow and detect heat signatures from hidden facilities. We tracked it on our monitors, watched it pass directly over Refuge 7's position. For 36 hours, we powered down everything except life support. turned off the heating, shut down the lights, sat in near darkness in temperatures that dropped to just above freezing, holding our breath every time the drone made another pass overhead. It moved on, never detected us. Colonel MacDonald said it was because we were deep enough that the permafrost insulated us. I think we just got lucky. Either way, we survived, but others didn't. In March of that year, we lost contact with Refuge 4 in northern Ontario. Their last transmission said American power armor units had breached the outer tunnels. We never heard from them again. 430 people, gone in a single day. The commander called an emergency meeting, showed us maps with one of the red dots crossed out, said we needed to assume the Americans had captured someone who knew about the network, said we needed to prepare for the possibility that they'd come for us next. We fortified, collapsed tunnels we didn't need, mined the approaches, set up remote detonators that could seal the facility completely if we were compromised, turned Refuge 7 from a shelter into a fortress. April, May, June passed. Summer in the Yukon, though you'd hardly know it 300 feet underground. We listened to radio broadcasts, monitored the situation above. The war in Alaska was intensifying. American and Chinese forces were tearing each other apart over Anchorage. Rumors said both sides were preparing for something bigger. October 22nd, 2077. Colonel MacDonald called everyone to the command center. He looked older than when I'd first met him, worn down by the weight of keeping all of us alive. He said he'd received coded messages from the other refuges. Something was happening. Multiple sources reported unusual military movements, American forces pulling back from forward positions, government officials disappearing into Vault-Tec facilities. It's tomorrow, he said, or today. We don't know exactly when, but it's coming. Everyone to shelter positions, full radiation protocols, and may God help us all. October 23rd, 2077, 11:27 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my watch when the lights flickered, when the emergency sirens started wailing, when Colonel MacDonald's voice came over the intercom system, steady despite what he was about to say. Nuclear detonations detected, multiple strikes. This is not a drill. All personnel to designated shelter positions. Seal all blast doors. Activate radiation shielding. God save Canada. 300 feet of rock and permafrost above us. Military-grade blast doors rated for direct hits. Radiation shielding that had cost us months of scavenged materials to install properly. We'd prepared for this moment for years, but nothing really prepares you for the end of the world. The first shockwaves hit 90 seconds after the sirens. Even that deep, we felt them. The entire facility shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Someone screamed. Then, someone else started praying. I just held onto the metal bunk frame and tried not to think about everyone above ground, everyone who hadn't made it to shelter, everyone who was burning right now. The shaking went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, the command center sprang into action. Colonel MacDonald and his staff monitored every sensor we had. Radiation detectors outside the facility, seismic monitors, air quality samplers. The numbers that came back made grown soldiers go pale. Radiation levels outside were already lethal and climbing. Multiple strikes had hit the Yukon, probably targeting what was left of American military installations and the pipeline infrastructure. The permafrost that had insulated us was now one of the only things keeping us alive, shielding us from radiation that would have cooked us in minutes on the surface. For 3 days, we stayed sealed, ate rations that tasted like cardboard, tried to sleep through the aftershocks that continued to rattle our bunks, listened to the radio frequencies we'd used to communicate with other refuges, hearing nothing but static where voices should have been. On the 4th day, Colonel MacDonald ordered a partial unsealing, opened the ventilation systems to filtered outside air. The readings were still bad, but survivable with proper protection. We needed to know what was left up there. We needed to know if anyone else had survived. I volunteered for the first surface team, me and 3 others, all experienced with the wilderness. We suited up in hazard gear we'd stolen from an American industrial site years ago, checked our radiation counters twice, and climbed that long shaft back to the surface. Nothing could have prepared us for what we found. The entrance we'd used was intact, still concealed behind its rockfall, but beyond that, the world had changed. The sky was wrong, dark orange and red, like a permanent sunset, choked with ash and debris. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Snow that had been white was now gray and black, contaminated with radioactive fallout. And the silence, complete silence. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds of American patrols or machinery, just the clicking of our radiation counters and our own breathing inside the hazard suits. We pushed out 2 kilometers, checking pre-positioned supply caches and observation points. Everything was coated in ash. Trees that had survived American logging were now skeletal and burned. We found the remains of an American outpost that had been here the week before. Just a crater now, still glowing faintly with residual radiation. One of our team, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been a park ranger before the war, pointed toward what used to be Whitehorse. The city was gone, completely flattened. In its place, a massive crater that must have taken a direct hit from something big. Maybe multiple warheads. The Americans had concentrated their forces there. Now, it was just radioactive glass and twisted metal. We documented everything with cameras, collected soil and snow samples, marked radiation hotspots on our maps. Then, we went back down before our exposure meters hit critical levels. Colonel MacDonald studied our findings in silence. Then, he made the call we'd all been dreading. "We're on our own," he said. "Whatever other refuges might have survived, we can't reach them. The surface is too contaminated for regular travel. Radio signals are being scattered by the atmospheric disturbance. We have to assume we're the only ones left. But here's what nobody expected. Here's the thing that changed everything about our mission and our purpose. We weren't the only ones who survived up here. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks after the bombs fell, perimeter sensors detected movement. Someone approaching the concealed entrance. We went to full alert, weapons ready, expecting American survivors or worse. What we got was a family, mother, father, 2 children, Inuit from a village 200 kilometers north. Their radiation counters were screaming, their skin already showing signs of exposure, but they were alive. The mother held out a piece of paper. On it, coordinates, the location of Refuge 7, and a message in a code only we would recognize, one that had been passed through Canadian resistance networks since the beginning. Catherine Rousseau had sent them. She'd survived, and she knew where we were. We brought them inside, treated their radiation sickness, saved the children, though the parents didn't make it through the first week. Before the father died, he told us there were others, scattered groups of survivors who'd hidden in mines, caves, anywhere deep enough to escape the initial radiation. Catherine was organizing them, he said, building a new network. She'd sent them here because she knew we'd help. Over the next 6 months, 43 more survivors found their way to us, some sent by Catherine, others who'd heard rumors of a place in the deep Yukon where Canadians still lived free. Each one brought stories of the surface world, and none of them were good. The radiation was killing everything. Animals were dying or mutating. Water sources were contaminated. The few American survivors from military bunkers had turned into raiders, fighting over scraps, and something worse was happening to people who'd been exposed too long. Their skin was falling off. They were changing into something that wasn't quite human anymore. We'd later learn these were ghouls, the result of specific types of radiation exposure. Some kept their minds, most didn't. The feral ones, the ones who'd lost everything that made them human, they were spreading across the wasteland like a plague. Colonel MacDonald made a decision. Refuge 7 would become exactly what its name suggested. A refuge, open to any Canadian who could make it here, any survivor who needed shelter. We'd preserve what we could and help who we could, even if it meant stretching our resources thinner than planned. But that decision came with a cost. With more people came more risk, more surface expeditions for supplies, more chance of being discovered by whoever else was out there. And as we'd learn, we weren't the only ones interested in the Canadian North. March of 2078, almost 5 months after the bombs, one of our scavenging teams reported something impossible: fresh power armor tracks near an old pipeline station. Not American military surplus, new tracks. Someone was still operating advanced equipment out there. We investigated carefully. What we found was a nightmare from the old world that refused to die. An American military unit, sealed in a hardened bunker when the bombs fell, had survived. The 50 soldiers, 3 suits of functioning power armor, enough supplies to last them years, and a mission they were still following even though the nation that gave it to them no longer existed. Their commander was a captain named Morris. We captured one of his scouts during a supply run. The man wouldn't talk at first, kept demanding to be returned to American custody, kept insisting Canada was American territory and we were enemy combatants. Then we showed him the surface, showed him what had become of his precious America, showed him that there was no chain of command anymore, no United States, no Canada, just survivors trying to live long enough to see tomorrow. He broke, told us everything. Captain Morris had gone insane, he said, refused to accept that the war was over, insisted they were still on a mission to secure Canadian resources and eliminate resistance threats. They'd been systematically searching for survivors to either recruit or eliminate. They'd already found and destroyed 2 small survivor camps that refused to submit to American authority. What do you do with information like that? What do you do when you learn there are people out there, equipped with pre-war military hardware, who want to kill you for the crime of being Canadian? Colonel MacDonald called a council meeting. Everyone with military experience, everyone who'd been part of the resistance. We debated for 6 hours. Some wanted to hide deeper, others wanted to strike first. A few suggested trying to negotiate. I was in the strike first camp. I'd seen what the Americans did to protesters in Toronto, what they did to resistance fighters in the Yukon. They'd proven over and over that they didn't value Canadian lives. And Captain Morris clearly hadn't learned anything from the end of the world, but Colonel MacDonald made a different choice. He sent Catherine Rousseau. She'd arrived at Refuge 7 2 months prior, half dead from radiation exposure and months of living in the wasteland. We'd saved her life. Now she was going to try to save others. Catherine took 3 of our best people and approached Morris's bunker under a white flag. She offered terms: sanctuary in exchange for standing down, shared resources in exchange for peace, a chance to survive together instead of dying separately. Morris shot the white flag carrier. Then he sent a message back with Catherine: surrender the location of Refuge 7 and all resistance installations, or he'd hunt us down one by one. The council met again. This time, there was no debate. We went to war. It wasn't like the old days fighting the American military. We didn't have the numbers or equipment for direct confrontation, but we had something better. We had home field advantage. We knew every valley, every canyon, every hidden approach in the Yukon, and we'd been preparing for exactly this kind of fight for years. We started with their supply lines. Morris's bunker was well stocked, but not infinite. They needed to scavenge just like everyone else. We poisoned their water sources, destroyed their supply caches, set traps along their patrol routes that would make American military engineers from before the war proud. After 2 months of guerrilla warfare, Morris had lost 15 soldiers and all 3 suits of power armor. We'd taken casualties too, good people who died keeping the rest of us safe. But we'd proven something important. The old world was dead. Anyone who couldn't accept that would die with it. Morris made one last desperate move. He launched a direct assault on what he thought was Refuge 7's location. Intelligence we deliberately leaked through a captured soldier. He committed his remaining forces to a night attack on a position 20 kilometers from our actual facility. We let them come, let them think they'd found us. Then we collapsed the entire valley on top of them. Explosives we'd placed months ago, hidden in the rock walls, triggered all at once. An avalanche of stone and ice that buried Morris and his delusions forever. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores, but eliminating one threat just revealed others. With Morris gone, we started hearing reports of new dangers, mutated creatures emerging from the radiation, raiders from down south, pushing into the Yukon looking for places to loot, and worst of all, rumors of something in the old Vault-Tec facilities. See, Vault-Tec had started construction on at least one installation in newly annexed Canada before the bombs fell. We'd found references to it in pre-war documents, a vault somewhere in central Canada, probably Manitoba or Saskatchewan. The location was never completed in the records we had, but the project was real, and according to survivors who'd passed through that region, something had emerged from it. People in vault suits, they said. But wrong somehow, acting according to rules that made no sense, following orders from before the war like nothing had changed. I wanted to investigate, wanted to know if Vault-Tec's experiments had infected Canadian soil the way they had American. But Colonel MacDonald said no. Our priority was survival, not exploration. We'd done what we needed to do, eliminated immediate threats, secured our position. Now we needed to focus on the long term. The long term, what a concept. Here we were, survivors of a nuclear apocalypse, hiding 300 feet underground in what used to be Canada, and we were talking about the long term. But that's exactly what we did. We expanded the hydroponics, improved our water filtration, started teaching classes to the children who'd been born in the refuge, children who'd never seen the old world. We were building something new, not Canada, not anymore, but something that remembered Canada, something that carried forward what we'd been. Years passed, 2080, 2085, 2090. The radiation levels started dropping, slowly, very slowly, but dropping. We sent out more surface expeditions, ranging farther from the refuge, mapped the new wasteland, found other survivor groups, and traded with them when we could. Some of those groups were Canadian, others were remnants of American settlers who'd come north before the war. A few were indigenous communities who'd survived through a combination of traditional knowledge and sheer will. We helped everyone we could, shared water purification techniques, medical supplies, information about safe travel routes, but we never told anyone where Refuge 7 was, never brought outsiders to the main facility. Trust was a luxury the wasteland couldn't afford. We'd learned that lesson with Captain Morris. I'm old now, 68 years old, living in a world I never imagined. The me that climbed down that access shaft in 2074, young and angry and certain of his purpose, wouldn't recognize what I've become. Commander of Refuge 7 after Colonel MacDonald died in 2093, guardian of secrets that get heavier with every passing year. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. Here's the real reason I'm making this recording. In the last 5 years, we've detected new activity in the Yukon, radio signals using pre-war American military encryption, movement patterns that suggest organized forces with advanced equipment, and most concerning, systematic searches of the region where our refuge is located. Someone knows we're here, or suspects it. Someone with resources and technology that shouldn't exist this long after the bombs fell. I've studied the patterns, analyzed the signals, and I've come to a conclusion that terrifies me. This isn't raiders or mutants or wasteland survivors. This is organized, methodical, military, the enclave. That's what some of the old American documents called them, the shadow government that was supposed to survive the nuclear war and rebuild America. We thought they were destroyed, thought they died with the rest of the old world. We were wrong, and they're coming north. Looking for something, maybe pre-war technology, maybe resources, maybe they've heard rumors of Canadian resistance survivors who never surrendered, who kept the old grudges alive even after the world ended. I've prepared Refuge 7 for another siege, collapsed additional tunnels, improved our defenses, but I'm not sure it'll be enough. Not against power armor and weapons that make what Captain Morris had look like toys. That's why I'm making this recording. Why I've activated the beacon transmitters we planted across the Yukon decades ago. If the Enclave finds us, if they breach our defenses, I want someone to know what happened here. I want the truth preserved. Canada died in 2077, but Canadians didn't. We survived. We endured. We kept the memory alive even when the entire world told us to forget. And if you found this recording, if you're hearing my voice, then you need to know something else. Something I've kept secret even from most of the people in this refuge. We're not the last one. Refuge 7 isn't the only installation that survived. I've maintained contact with 2 others. Refuge 3 in Manitoba, Refuge 11 in Newfoundland. They're still out there, still alive, still Canadian. The encrypted radio protocols we use are old Canadian military codes, updated with cipher keys we change monthly. Every first Wednesday at 0300 hours, I transmit. Every first Thursday, I listen. The signals are weak, scattered by lingering atmospheric interference from the war. But they're there. Refuge 3, Commander Elizabeth Park, former Canadian Forces intelligence officer. Her installation shelters 370 people under the Manitoba Shield, built into an old nickel mine that the Americans never properly surveyed. She's been fighting her own war against raiders from the south, tribals who've claimed the ruins of Winnipeg as their territory. Last transmission, she reported success in establishing trade relations, said they respect strength up there, said showing you can defend yourself earns more trust than any amount of goodwill. Refuge 11, Commander Robert Chen. No relation to Sarah Chen, though he asks about her every time we connect. He's on the coast of Newfoundland, hidden in sea caves that flood with every tide but stay perfectly concealed from anyone searching from land or air. Only 80 people in his refuge, the smallest of the survivors, but they've developed fishing techniques that work in radioactive oceans. They trade preserved fish to mainland survivors in exchange for medical supplies and ammunition. 3 refuges, maybe 500 people total who remember what Canada was, who keep the culture alive, who teach their children about a nation that existed before the world burned. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Here's the secret that weighs on me more than the Enclave threat or the dangers of the wasteland. We might not be preserving Canadian culture at all. We might just be preserving hatred. Let me explain. Last year, we had an incident. A young man born in the refuge after the war, maybe 20 years old. Name was Thomas. His parents were resistance fighters who'd made it to Refuge 7 in the early days. Good people. Patriots who'd fought the Americans and survived to tell about it. Thomas had grown up on those stories of American atrocities, the annexation, the executions, Captain Morris and his insane crusade. Every lesson, every history class, every fireside tale reinforced the same message. Americans destroyed Canada. Americans are the enemy. Americans can never be trusted. Then, we encountered a group of wasteland traders from down south, 4th-generation Americans whose great-grandparents had been in Canada when the bombs fell. They weren't military, weren't Enclave, just people trying to survive, same as us. They wanted to trade purified water for our hydroponic vegetables. Thomas pulled a gun on them, called them invaders, said they had no right to be on Canadian soil. It took 3 of us to restrain him. The traders left quickly, probably thinking we were all insane. And maybe we are. I had to make a choice that night. Punish Thomas for threatening peaceful traders or acknowledge that we'd created him. That we'd taught an entire generation to hate people for the crimes of their ancestors. That we'd preserved Canadian identity at the cost of becoming exactly the kind of nationalistic zealots we'd claimed to fight against. I chose conversation instead of punishment. Sat Thomas down and told him something I'd never told anyone else, something that happened in 2075, 2 years before the bombs fell. I killed an American soldier, not in combat, not in self-defense. I killed him because he was American and I wanted revenge. We'd hit a supply convoy near Dawson City, quick raid, grab what we could, disappear into the wilderness. But one of the American soldiers got separated from his unit. Young kid, maybe 19. He was lost, scared, fumbling with a radio, trying to call for help. I could have let him go, could have just disappeared and let him find his own way back. But I was angry. Angry about the annexation, angry about friends who died, angry about a country that had been stolen from us. So I shot him, put 2 bullets in his chest and left him in the snow. I searched his body afterward, found letters from his family in Oklahoma, found pictures of a girl back home, found a journal where he'd written about how much he hated being in Canada, how cold it was, how scared he was of the resistance fighters who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. He was just a kid who'd been drafted into a war he didn't understand, sent to a frozen territory to protect resources he'd never benefit from, and I killed him because of what his uniform represented. I told Thomas this story, told him about the nightmares I still have, the face of that soldier, surprised and hurt, looking at me like he couldn't understand why I'd done it, told him that revenge and justice aren't the same thing, that preserving Canadian culture means preserving the good parts, not the hatred. Thomas listened. Then he asked me a question that cut deeper than any blade. If you regret it so much, why did you keep fighting? Why did you come to Refuge 7? Why did you take command and continue the mission? I didn't have a good answer then. I'm not sure I have one now. Maybe because the mission changed. Maybe because after the bombs fell, it stopped being about Canada versus America and started being about survival, about keeping people alive, about building something better than what came before. Or maybe I'm just fooling myself. Maybe we're all still fighting a war that ended 50 years ago, unable to let go of grudges that should have died with the old world. Here's a question for you. If you're out there listening, if you find this recording in the wasteland, if you're trying to understand what we were and what we became, can you preserve culture without preserving the conflicts that shaped it? Can you remember who you were without hating who others were? Or is that asking too much of people who've lost everything? The Enclave signals are getting stronger, closer. 3 weeks ago, we detected a patrol within 10 kilometers of our position. They were using some kind of scanning equipment, sweeping the terrain in a grid pattern, looking for something specific. We've gone dark, minimum power, no external transmissions. Even my regular contacts with Refuge 3 and Refuge 11 have stopped. Too risky. If the Enclave is monitoring radio frequencies, any signal could give us away. But staying dark means staying isolated. And isolation means if something happens to us, the other refugees won't know, won't be able to warn others, won't be able to continue the mission. That's why I've prepared this recording. Multiple copies, stored in weatherproof containers, planted near the surface along old resistance supply routes. If someone finds one, they'll find coordinates to the others, piece together the full story, learn what really happened up here in the Canadian North. I've also prepared something else, something that goes against every instinct I have as a commander, as a Canadian, as someone who's spent decades trying to preserve what we were. An offer of peace. Sealed in the same containers as these recordings is a message for the Enclave. If they find us, if they breach our defenses, if we can't stop them with force, then maybe we can stop them with words. The message offers cooperation, shared resources, access to our hydroponics and water purification in exchange for protection and medical supplies. It's a betrayal of everything we fought for. The resistance would never have negotiated with the Americans. Catherine Rousseau would have died before surrendering to anyone wearing American colors. Colonel MacDonald built this place specifically to avoid American control. But they're all dead now. Catherine fell in 2089, killed by raiders near the ruins of Vancouver. Colonel MacDonald died of cancer caused by radiation exposure he received on surface expeditions. The old guard is gone, and maybe the old grudges should die with them. I showed the peace offer to my second-in-command, a woman named Marie Laporte, who was born in the refuge in 2080. She never saw the old world, never experienced the annexation. Her entire life has been in these tunnels, learning about Canada from books and stories and recordings. She read the offer and then looked at me with something like pity in her eyes. "You still don't understand," she said. "The Enclave doesn't want cooperation, they want control. That's what America always wanted. That's what killed the old world. And offering them peace is just admitting they won." Maybe she's right. Maybe I've gone soft in my old age. Maybe 50 years underground has broken something in me that used to be hard and certain. Or maybe I'm just tired of fighting, tired of hating, tired of carrying forward conflicts that should have ended when the bombs fell. But here's what worries me most. It's not the Enclave. It's not the possibility that they'll find us and destroy everything we've built. What worries me is the possibility that they'll find us and we'll destroy ourselves, because we've prepared for external threats. We have defenses, traps, weapons, contingency plans for everything from raiders to mutant creatures to hostile military forces. What we haven't prepared for is internal division, the possibility that when push comes to shove, we'll tear each other apart, arguing about what Canada means and who has the right to define it. Thomas represents one faction, young, angry, certain that any compromise with Americans is betrayal. Marie leads another group that's more pragmatic, willing to work with anyone who can help us survive. And there are others who've given up entirely on the idea of national identity, who think Canada is dead and trying to resurrect it is pointless. I've tried to hold these factions together, mediate disputes, find common ground, but it's getting harder. Resources are stretched thin, people are scared, and fear makes people do stupid things. 2 months ago, we had a vote, the first real democratic vote in Refuge 7's history. The question was simple: if the Enclave offers peace terms, do we negotiate or fight? The vote was close, 52% for negotiation, 48% for resistance to the death. I sided with negotiation, which surprised some people. The old resistance fighter, the man who'd spent years fighting Americans, voting to talk instead of shoot. But here's what I've learned in 50 years of survival. Fighting is easy. Killing is easy. What's hard is building something that lasts. What's hard is making choices that benefit people you'll never meet, generations who'll be born long after you're dead. The Enclave might destroy us, but we'll definitely destroy ourselves if we can't find unity. And maybe that's the real lesson from the old world. Maybe Canada didn't fall because America was too strong. Maybe it fell because we were too divided, too focused on our own grievances, too unable to work together when it mattered most. I think about that American soldier I killed sometimes. Wonder what he'd think if he could see me now. An old man in a bunker, trying to preserve the culture of a nation that killed him for wearing the wrong uniform. Would he understand? Would he forgive? Or would he just see another enemy, another threat, another reason why the old conflicts can never really end? There's a young girl in the refuge, 8 years old, name's Emily. She's never seen the sun, never felt rain on her face, never experienced anything except these tunnels and the stories we tell about a world that doesn't exist anymore. She asked me last week what Canada looked like. I showed her pictures from before the war, mountains and forests and cities full of people. She studied them carefully and then asked the question that broke my heart. Why would anyone destroy something so beautiful? I didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense to an 8-year-old. How do you explain the resource wars, the fear and greed and nationalism that consumed the old world, the certainty on all sides that they were right and everyone else was the enemy? So I told her the truth. People forgot how to share, forgot how to compromise, forgot that what we have in common is more important than what divides us, and by the time they remembered, it was too late. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said something that gave me hope for the first time in years. We won't forget, we'll remember, and we'll do better. Maybe that's the real mission. Not preserving Canadian culture exactly as it was, not continuing the fights of the old world, but taking the best parts, the things worth saving, and building something new, something that learns from the mistakes instead of repeating them. The Enclave is still out there. still searching. But maybe they're not the real threat. Maybe the real threat is us, our inability to let go, our determination to keep fighting wars that already ended, our failure to imagine something better than what came before. If you find this recording, whoever you are, whatever faction or nation or tribe you belong to, remember this. The old world ended because people valued their differences more than their common humanity. Don't make the same mistake. Don't let hatred and fear and pride destroy what could be built. We survived the annexation. We survived the bombs. We survived 50 years in the wasteland. But we won't survive ourselves unless we choose differently than our ancestors did. The Enclave Patrol is back. I can hear them on our external sensors. They're close now. Maybe hours away from finding the entrance. Maybe less. I've sealed this recording. Program the beacon to activate if our facility is compromised. Someone will find it. Someone will hear this story. And maybe, just maybe, they'll learn something from our mistakes. Canada is dead. Long live whatever comes next. I'm recording this final entry in real time. The Enclave is at our door, literally. I can hear the cutting equipment working through the outer blast door. Military-grade plasma torches, probably. We sealed it properly, reinforced it beyond original specifications, but they have time and technology. They'll get through. The refuge is in controlled chaos, families gathering in the deepest chambers, fighters taking positions at choke points, medical staff preparing for casualties, and me sitting in the command center, watching our sensors die one by one as the Enclave systematically disables them. Marie Laporte is standing next to me. She's armed, ready to fight, but she's also crying. Not from fear, from anger. The old world is literally knocking at our door, she says, refusing to stay dead, refusing to let us build something new. She's right, but she's also wrong. Because here's what happened 3 hours ago. Here's the thing that changes everything about this story and everything I thought I knew about the Enclave and their mission. They sent a message through our external speakers, asked to talk, not demanded surrender, not threatened extinction, asked, with something that sounded almost like respect in the mechanical voice. I almost didn't respond. Years of training and resistance and fighting told me it was a trick, a way to make us lower our guard, but something else, some instinct I developed in 50 years of trying to keep people alive, told me to listen. I activated the external speakers, said I was Commander Marcus Tremblay of Refuge 7, asked what they wanted. The voice that responded wasn't what I expected. Older, tired, familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. It said, Marcus Tremblay, formerly of the Canadian Armed Forces, formerly of Edmonton Resistance Cell 12. We know who you are. We know what you've built here, and we're not here to destroy it. That got my attention. How did they know about Cell 12? That was classified even in resistance records. Only a handful of people knew the cell designations, and most of them were dead. I asked the question directly. Who are you? How do you know that? A pause. Then, my name is Colonel David Harrison, United States Army, retired. I was part of the occupation force in Alberta in 2073. I was there when Edmonton fell, and I've spent the last 50 years trying to make amends for what we did. The name triggered memories I'd tried to bury. Colonel Harrison, the American officer who'd ordered the crackdown on protests in Edmonton, who'd supervised the rationing programs that starved families, who'd been responsible for maintaining order in one of the most volatile cities during the annexation. I'd wanted to kill that man once. The resistance had him on a target list, high value, someone whose death would hurt American morale and maybe, just maybe, slow down the occupation. We never got the chance. He disappeared from Edmonton in 2074, transferred elsewhere. I assumed he'd been reassigned to the front lines, never thought about him again, and now he was outside my door, claiming to want peace. I told him I remembered his name, remembered what he did, asked why I shouldn't just seal the facility and let him waste his time cutting through blast doors while we escaped through emergency tunnels. His response, Because we found Refuge 3 last month, and instead of attacking, we helped them repair their water filtration system. Because we found Refuge 11 2 weeks ago, and instead of forcing entry, we traded medical supplies for fresh fish. Because the Enclave isn't what you think it is anymore. And because I need you to hear the truth before you make a decision that gets everyone killed. I looked at Marie. She was shaking her head. It's a lie, she said. Has to be. The Enclave wants control, wants to rebuild America on top of everyone else's graves. That's what they've always wanted. But I thought about Commander Park at Refuge 3, thought about how her last transmission mentioned new allies with advanced technology, how she'd sounded hopeful instead of afraid, and Commander Chen at Refuge 11, who'd reported a trade deal that seemed too good to be true. Maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe it was something else, something I hadn't considered because I'd been so certain the old conflicts would never end. I made a choice, told Harrison to stop cutting, said I'd open the outer door. One person could come inside, unarmed, to talk. Any sign of betrayal, and we'd collapse the entire facility on top of both of us. Marie grabbed my arm. "This is insane," she said. "You're going to get us all killed." "Maybe," I replied, "but I'm tired of killing being the only option we consider. I'm tired of assuming the worst of everyone. I'm tired of fighting." I went to the outer entrance alone, opened the inner blast door, walked through the airlock. My hand was on the door controls, ready to seal everything if this went wrong, ready to die if it meant protecting the people behind me. The outer door opened, and Colonel David Harrison walked in. He was old, older than me, which made sense given his rank back in 73. His hair was white, his face was scarred, radiation burns from the look of it. He wore Enclave power armor, but the helmet was off, mag locked to his hip, showing trust. We stood there looking at each other, the Canadian resistance fighter and the American occupation officer, enemies separated by 50 years and the end of the world. He spoke first. "I owe you an apology, not for following orders, because that's the coward's excuse, for choosing to follow those orders, for believing that American security was more important than Canadian lives, for thinking the end justified the means." I wanted to hate him, wanted to feel the old anger, but standing there, looking at this broken old man who'd somehow survived the apocalypse, all I felt was tired. I told him, "Apologies don't bring back the dead. Don't undo the annexation. Don't rebuild what was destroyed." Asked him what he really wanted. He said, "I want the same thing you do. I want people to survive. I want the next generation to have a chance. And I want to stop the cycle of revenge that destroyed the old world." Then he told me a story I wasn't expecting. The Enclave had fractured after the war. The hardliners, the ones who wanted to rebuild America exactly as it was, they'd gone east, tried to establish control over the capital wasteland, fought wars against local populations, eventually destroyed themselves through their own arrogance and inability to adapt. But there was another faction, smaller, led by officers who'd seen the annexation of Canada, who'd participated in atrocities they couldn't forget, who'd realized, too late, that following orders wasn't the same as doing what was right. That faction went north, back to the territories they'd helped destroy, looking for survivors, looking for a chance to do something right for once in their miserable lives. They'd found survivor communities, offered help instead of demanding control, shared technology instead of hoarding it, built alliances instead of empires. Slowly, carefully, trying to prove they'd learned something from the end of the world, Harrison pulled out a data pad, showed me evidence, photographs of Enclave soldiers working alongside Canadian survivors, medical facilities they'd helped establish, trade routes they'd protected from raiders, testimonials from people I knew, people from the other refuges confirming his story. It could have been fake, could have been propaganda, but I'd been reading people for 50 years. Surviving underground required being able to tell truth from lies, and Harrison was telling the truth. I asked him the hard question. Why? Why help the people you tried to destroy? Why spend 50 years making amends instead of just rebuilding somewhere else? He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death. Because I have nightmares, he said. Every night, I see the faces of people I killed or let die, Canadian citizens who just wanted to live in their own country, protesters who just wanted their voices heard, resistance fighters who were defending their homes. He paused, then continued, I can't undo what I did, can't bring them back, but I can try to build something better, try to make sure their children and grandchildren have a chance at something more than revenge and hatred and endless war. I brought him deeper into the facility. Marie and the others were waiting, weapons ready. They saw the Enclave armor and tensed. But I'd made my choice. I told them Harrison's story, showed them the evidence, asked them to vote, not on whether to fight or surrender, on whether to take a chance on something different, on whether to choose hope over hatred. The debate lasted 6 hours. People shouted, some cried. Old wounds were reopened, stories were told about loved ones lost to American occupation, about atrocities that could never be forgiven or forgotten. But in the end, something surprising happened. Emily, the 8-year-old girl who'd asked me why anyone would destroy something beautiful, stood up. She walked to the center of the room and said, My grandparents died fighting Americans. My parents told me stories about how evil they were, but Commander Tremblay taught me that we should do better than the old world, and doing better means trying. Out of the mouths of children, the wisdom we'd lost somewhere along the way, the vote was 68% in favor of cooperation. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but cooperation, a chance to build something new together. We opened Refuge 7 to Harrison's people, not completely, not all at once, but enough to show trust, enough to start building bridges instead of walls. They brought medical technology we desperately needed, radiation treatments that actually worked, advanced water purification, seeds for crops that could grow in contaminated soil, things that would save lives and improve futures. In exchange, we shared our knowledge, hydroponics techniques we developed over 50 years, geothermal power systems, radio encryption, the accumulated wisdom of survival in the Canadian wasteland. And we told them about the other refuges, connected them with Commander Park and Commander Chen, built a network not of resistance fighters hiding from enemies, but of survivors working together. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the world has changed in small but significant ways. Trade routes established, medical supplies flowing, children from different refuges meeting each other, learning that the old divisions don't have to define the future. It's not perfect. There are still hardliners on both sides who think cooperation is betrayal. Still people who can't let go of old hatreds. Still moments when I wonder if we've made a terrible mistake. But then I see Emily playing with a child whose grandfather fought for the Americans. See them laughing together, sharing stories, completely oblivious to the fact that their ancestors tried to kill each other. And I think maybe, just maybe, we've broken the cycle. Harrison asked me yesterday what I thought Canada meant now. In this new world, where nations are memories and survival is the only nationality that matters, I told him Canada was an idea, the idea that people could live together despite differences, that resources could be shared instead of hoarded, that compromise was strength, not weakness, that the true North, strong and free, wasn't about borders or flags, but about principles worth preserving. He said that sounded like something America was supposed to be too, before fear and greed corrupted it, before the resource wars turned ideals into excuses for conquest. Maybe we're building something new, I said. Not Canada, not America, something that learns from both and becomes better than either. Maybe, he agreed. Or maybe we're just two old men trying to make sense of choices that haunted us. Either way, it's better than the alternative. I'm finishing this recording now. The threat has passed. The enclave that found us became allies instead of enemies. Refuge 7 stands not as a monument to Canadian resistance, but as a foundation for something new. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if this alliance will last, or if we're just delaying inevitable conflict. Don't know if the hardliners will sabotage what we're building, or if new threats will emerge from the wasteland. But I know this. We survived the annexation. We survived the bombs. We survived 50 years of isolation and fear and fighting. And now we're choosing to survive together. Canada is dead, long dead. But the people who were Canadian, the values that made Canada worth fighting for, those survive. In Refuge 7, in the other installations, in every survivor who chooses cooperation over conflict, hope over hatred, building over destroying. This is Commander Marcus Tremblay, signing off. The old world is dead. The new world is being born. And for the first time in 50 years, I'm not afraid of what comes next. We endured. We remembered. And now, finally, we're learning to forgive. The beacon is shutting down. If you found this recording, you know the truth. What you do with it is up to you. But remember what we learned, what cost us everything to understand. The wars of the old world died with the old world. Don't resurrect them. Build something better instead. Canada Libre, America free, humanity surviving. That's the only mission that matters now.